Uh, Thanks, Bijoy and Abha for having me here to this very interesting capacity building workshop that you have been conducting. Uh, it's not been easy for community radio stations and capacity building and facilitating organizations such as yours or the UNESCO chair to operate with community radio stations during the last couple of years, almost couple of years. Uh, but let me first, you know, uh, a small bit of apology to the stations and all the grassroots practitioners who are here for, in a way, pushing Bijoy to push people like Bhaskar to wind up quickly because of my presence. I mean, I would love to listen to Bhaskar ji any day. I mean, there's so much of learning to get out of the kind of work that's happened in Radio Brahmaputra. And some of the other friends who have spoken already, Radhaji, Aarti Bisht, our old friend Soumya. I mean, I always, get a lot of takeaways when I listen to communities and community radio stations sharing their experiences. And I feel quite awkward to, butt in at the very end of this workshop to dole out some pearls of wisdom. The pearls of wisdom are all here in this workshop amidst you. But in any case, now that Abha and Vijay have done me the honor of inviting me here, let me share a few thoughts. But let me first start by congratulating the community radio stations of India for the exemplary work that they have been doing uh, for the last 2 years during this very difficult period during the coronavirus pandemic. Uh, Everything that many of us have dreamt of when we thought of community radio movement in India 20 years ago, uh, many of those ideas, many of those visions that we had for community radio have really come true during this period. Uh, Stations have fought against a lot of odds, uh, have battled personal risk of infection to themselves, have fought against the fake news infodemic uh, to do their job, which is to provide a valuable service to the communities that they serve. Yeah. Uh, so my hearty congratulations and heartfelt thank you from the movement, from the community radio movement, of which I am a small part. Uh, Community radio is what I think Bhaskarji was talking about it. Uh, we call it participatory media, right? Now, participatory media like community radio, uh, produced and managed by local communities, have always been very vital in times of disasters and crisis. Uh, because it has an underlying philosophy of empowering the marginalized people. And with that philosophy, community radio is tuned to disaster management approaches that focus on vulnerable sections of our society, right? Some of the dominant approaches to disaster management do not always pay attention to the vulnerable sections, whereas community radio, participatory media like community radio, focus on vulnerable sections of society. There is now a lot of evidence, documented evidence, about the significance of community radio in dealing with disaster risk reduction, disaster management, and this evidence is there from India. Uh, Bijoy had earlier, mentioned, the work done in Uttarakhand, the work done in Assam. So we have evidence of that in our own country, but also in other parts of South Asia, from Bangladesh, from Nepal. Uh, there are exciting stories about community radio's work in the time of disasters from Africa, from Australia, from the Caribbean, of how local communities have used their own communication competencies to share information about natural disasters, rehabilitation efforts, and to build strong communities that can adopt sustainable development. Because it's not just about responding during the time of the crisis, but building a sustained community that is capable of facing climate change, that's capable of facing any kinds of disasters and crises in the future. So adopt suitable practices, right? So they become less vulnerable to future disasters. It has also been pointed out that community radios play a crucial role in enabling communities to assess the risk of disasters and prepare for appropriate responses. I have a feeling Soumya wants me to stop for a minute or two. She might want to quickly translate. My apologies again for not being able to do a speech like this fully in Hindi. I mean, I do understand Hindi, but Soumya ji, अगर आप translate करना चाहे तो I can pause for a minute or two.
सर इट्स ओके, जो
Is
भी
it okay?
लाइक रेडियो के साथी हैं वो इजीली एक्सेस, जहां पे होगा मैं आपको रोक के मैं
Please
ट्रांसलेट कर दूंगी.
let me know. Yeah.
या श्योर.
Yeah. So community radios are able to deliver during natural disasters or public health crises, such as the coronavirus pandemic, because of certain key characteristics that define them, right? I mean, during the last 2 years, our team at the Unesco chair has been tracking the work being done in Africa, in Latin America, parts of South America, Australia, and so on, to see what they are doing and how they are coping. And you will see again and again that community radios globally have certain essential features that make them a perfect candidate to function during crisis situations like the coronavirus pandemic. What are these characteristics? First of all, their closeness to the community, right? Their proximity to the community. And this closeness to the community is reinforced, is strengthened by decades of grassroots work, decades of grassroots mobilization work in which some of the parent NGOs have been engaged, because this thing doesn't come overnight, right? That is one primary advantage, that proximity, closeness to the community that comes from grassroots mobilization work over decades. Secondly, community radio programs are mostly produced in partnership with and the participation of community members, not with inputs from professionally trained broadcasters. Yeah, it is communities like you that produce the programs. Yeah, so that closeness with the community and production of content in collaboration with communities is obviously another strength of communities. Thirdly, unlike the one-size-fits-all models of dissemination of information, I mean, large multilateral agencies, large international NGOs, and of course governments have always talked about IEC approaches and so on, right? And some of these IEC approaches tend to be, one size fits all kind of solutions. There is one message, one channel, and you mass disseminate this information to millions of people. Now, unlike that model, the content of community radios is specific to the local context, right? It and shares relevant experiences and information that large scale centralized media, the so-called powerful mainstream media cannot. Right? It is that kind of information that is uh, broadcast by community radios. Finally, in terms of the key features that make community radios a vital player during crises like coronavirus, uh, the last feature is that the programming in community radios, as you have already heard people talking about Bhojpuri and so on, the community radio programming is mostly done in local languages and dialects. With community radios in India today, uh, resounding to the sounds of, languages like Marwadi, Kutchi, Bundeli, Bhojpuri, Haryanvi, uh, Desia, the plantation languages in Assam, uh, languages that were rarely heard over the airwaves 15, 20 years ago. So it really, sort of fills my heart to listen to all of you talk about the kind of content that you have been producing during this critical period in these kinds of local languages. I mean, this was the vision of community radio that many of us had when we started this movement. Uh, Having said that,
Pavrala sir, I would
yeah,
like to translate what you have said.
please, go ahead, Soumya.
ये एक बहुत ही इम्पोर्टेंट बात जो कही है कि सबसे पहले जो उन्होंने बात कही है कि इंफॉर्मेशन डिसेमिनेशन की बात कही है कि जब भी कोई बड़ी एजेंसी या अंतर्राष्ट्रीय संस्था या बड़े ऊपर से जब प्रोग्राम आते हैं तो वो प्रोग्राम जब नीचे स्तर पे जाता है तो वो एक तरह का जाता है, लेकिन सामुदायिक रेडियो की ये खूबी है कि उन प्रोग्राम को बहुत स्थानीय भाषा लोकल डायलेक्ट में लाते हैं, जो कि एक सबसे बड़ा स्ट्रेंथ है कम्युनिटी रेडियो का, कि हम कैसे अलग अलग बोलियों में उन प्रोग्राम का प्रसारण करते हैं। ऐसा नहीं कि जो एक तरह की भाषा ऊपर हमें दे दी गई है कि ये प्रोग्राम ये मैसेज जाना है, हम उस मैसेज को वैसे ही ले रहे हैं। तो जो इंफॉर्मेशन डिसेमिनेशन इन लोकल डायलेक्ट की बात की गई है, ये एक बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है और बहुत ही एक हमारा स्ट्रेंथ है, मतलब कम्युनिटी रेडियो का एक स्ट्रेंथ है। दूसरी जो उन्होंने बात कही है कि वो ये भी जानना चाहते हैं और मतलब पसंद है कि कैसे अलग अलग प्रोग्रामिंग अलग अलग गांव क्षेत्र में बहुत ही फॉर्मेट चेंजेस हो रहे हैं, हमारी बोलियां बदल रही है, तो जिस तरीके से वो बदलाव ला रहे हैं तो वो चाहते हैं कि ये प्रोग्राम भी बाकी लोग भी सुने और उन तक भी पहुंचे। तो पवराला सर ये भी कोशिश है कि ये सारे प्रोग्राम्स जो बनेंगे भी या बन रहे हैं वो एडा के वेबसाइट पे भी जाएंगे ताकि बाकी लोग एक्सेस कर सके। तो यदि आप कोई ऐसी बोली में प्रोग्राम कर रहे हैं जो वो बोली अब धीरे धीरे समाप्त हो रही है या बहुत कम लोग उसको सुन पा रहे हैं, तो ये बहुत अच्छा होगा कि आप ये भी जरूर बताएं कि हम इन बोलियों में प्रोग्राम कर रहे हैं, इन भाषाओं में कर रहे हैं, अब इसके बहुत ही सीमित लोग हैं, बहुत लिमिटेड पॉपुलेशन है और बस यही लोग बोल रहे हैं। Sir, over to you.
And what is
this also goes a long way in preserving.
Vinod, you're muted.
Yeah,
it goes.
Yeah, you were saying something.
I was saying that when we conserve these programs in the local languages, it also helps to conserve and preserve these languages for posterity.
Absolutely.
I mean, most of these languages do not have a script. लिपि नहीं है इनकी,
yes.
तो उसके लिए और भी जरूरी हो जाता है कि इनका हम आर्काइविंग करें और ज्यादा से ज्यादा लोगों तक जो वहाँ के लोग हैं, ताकि उनके आगे बच्चे भी बोले। वो जो मातृभाषा की हम बात करते हैं, जो हम अब सबके सब हिंदी में आ रहे हैं, सबके सब अंग्रेजी में बोल रहे हैं, सो इट इज वेरी important to remain connected through these languages to your culture and your roots, and also preserve these languages. So I think EDA can also play a great role in preserving these languages when we upload all these programs in the local dialects there. Thank you.
Absolutely. I mean, the linguistic marginalization of many of the communities that all of you interact with is also extremely significant. I mean, many of your communities receive very little communication from the media in their own languages and dialects. In fact, some of your communities' languages and dialects are not even officially recognized by, by the state. I mean, some of the languages I had mentioned are not even listed in the constitution. I mean, Desia in parts of Odisha is doesn't even have a written script. It's not recognized, but community radios are broadcasting in those languages. Now, rising to the coronavirus challenge, many of the community radio stations have been playing an important role in mobilizing communities on the margins of society to protect themselves against the virus and offering locally relevant information, spreading awareness about safety precautions, symptoms of infection, testing, quarantine regulations, uh, at another level, debunking fake news circulating on social media, uh, giving alerts on arrival of ration supplies, about the movements and return of migrant workers, and increasingly during the past year on the relevance and importance of vaccination. I mean, there is so much of health communication that community radio stations that many of you represent. There has been very little training, for example, in health communication. So the way in which communities have risen to the occasion to deliver this kind of information across the world, and particularly in India and in our neighborhood, I'm really impressed with this work. Uh, Waqt Ki Awaz, Radha ji has already mentioned the kind of programs that they have done. I have also followed. See, I want to especially mention the programming done by stations during that important first year, during when there was very little information, when many organizations like One World, UNESCO chair and all, we were still groping in the dark, trying to figure out how to support, how to help these communities. At that time, without much support, without much push, without much funding from the government, many of these stations have been inventive, creative, and came up with fascinating kind of programming. So my congratulations again. Now, having said that, uh, one of the things that I want to uh, talk about here, Abaji, with your permission, is about the kind of support that our community radio stations require and have not been still able to get from the government. Uh, I know when you get 10 radio stations, community radio stations in a room, the first issue that comes up is sustainability and funding. And it is a real problem. I mean, it's not, I'm not reducing the importance of that. But if you look at that issue, uh, for a long time they said, we will give you advertising from the government through DAVP advertising and we'll support you. Now, you talk to any community radio station, they will tell you how much money is still pending to come from DAVP. Stations again and again tell you that DAVP funds are not coming through. Now, that is one ongoing problem.
Can I just butt in here? For the simple reason, we have done last month, we had undertaken about 27 workshops, webinars with the Information Broadcasting Ministry, and also reached out to BOC, Bureau of Outreach, Communication Outreach, जो भी अब इनका है DAVP का नया नाम. So what we realized was that the officials were telling that yes, we are willing to give the monies and everything. Unfortunately, there is a gap between how they raise their bills, how the funding is released from there, and a lot is happening that even their paper work is not complete. That is what they were saying. Out of 350 or community radio stations, only 112 were registered with them, out of which 127 were registered and 113 did not have full, complete documents with them. So there is a lack, there is a gap which needs to be addressed there also, so that at least tomorrow they can't turn around and tell us that because this information or these documents were missing, we did not give the monies. At least from our end, if awareness raising workshop or hand holding is required, I'm willing to take those few steps ahead. But as community radio practitioners, we also have to understand one aspect, that all said and done, government will not release a penny unless their documentation is complete. They will find some loophole or the other. So we have to plug that when we raise our bills. If it is a particular format, it needs to be addressed. If they require for their registration, something is required, all the documentations, then those have to be provided to the BOC department so that these can be smoothly disseminated.
I mean, Avaji, we can discuss, I'm sure, the bureaucratic procedures and how some stations are not able to cope with it. I can tell you, as a central university of some, eminence, I struggle to cope with government machinery and bureaucracy. Leave alone some station in, up in the hills of Uttarakhand and so on, being able to cope with this bureaucracy. I mean, we can discuss it. Another thing that really upsets me is the lack of adequate government response to emergency funding when the pandemic broke out. Country after country that we have been tracking has come up with emergency funding during the coronavirus pandemic, right? Because stations were struggling with lack of internet connectivity, their community radio, reporters and others struggling to upload using their data cards and so on, not having sufficient money on it, yeah, lack of public transport. For none of these things was there any emergency funding support. If community radio is considered a valuable public resource, shouldn't the government have come forward to provide some emergency funding to stations during this crisis period? All that I heard, I think in the month of May, it was during that minister's speech, that we will increase the advertising from 5 minutes or 7 minutes to 12 minutes per hour or whatever. Stations have a problem even filling advertising for 7 minutes to an hour. Forget about 12 minutes. That's not a solution. Yeah. We have also been saying, create a public support fund, a community radio support fund that is independent of the ministry, that could be managed by eminent people from different walks of life. And this is not just for establishment costs. This is not just for technology equipment, but they could use it for building their capacities, for retraining, for community mobilization. Some of this funding could also be used for a variety of things like this. Now that funding is not coming. This community radio support scheme, which some of you know of, the less said the better about it. There is very little money coming out of the support scheme for funding stations directly today, right? So we really need to hold the government accountable in terms of supporting community radio stations, which have delivered such an important service during this crisis period. One last thing about funding I want to say. Some of you may not know, I'm sure Vijay and Abha and maybe Soumya, some others may know about it, that we also proposed some time ago that the government seriously consider mobilizing a small proportion of something called the Universal Service Obligation Fund, USOF. Yeah, you look it up after this meeting, some of you who haven't heard of this. Universal Service Obligation Fund, to strengthen community radio stations that are operating in relatively deprived regions of the country, which is many of you. I mean, that's, you are catering to deprived communities in deprived regions. Now, India is a signatory to the Convention of the International Telecommunications Union and to its constitution. And India is obligated to see how the benefits of new communication technologies extend to the marginalized communities in this country. Now, the USOF was created almost 15 years ago, 2004. Now, what this is these are funds generated through a small levy called Universal Access Levy, UAL, on telecom operators. It is a small.
Can I just translate for everyone's benefit over here?
Pardon me?
Can I step into translate?
Yeah, just let me finish this idea and Vijay, yeah, you can. Yeah.
Okay.
So telecom operators are charged a small levy on the revenues they earn with telecom licenses. That levy goes into creating something called Universal Service Obligation Fund. Now, in the last 15 years, that fund, from what I know, is about 60,000 crores. 60,000 crores is the total quantum of that USOF. What I am suggesting is, even if a small proportion of that, let's say 1% of that, is dedicated to creating a public fund to support community radios, our community radio stations wouldn't be struggling to do their paperwork for DAVP advertising. Yeah, Vijay.
सो विनोद जो कह रहे हैं वो ये है कि जितने टेलीकॉम ऑपरेटर्स हैं, चाहे वो मतलब नाम उदाहरण के लिए ले लूं, वो जियो हो या वोडाफोन हो या एयरटेल हो या आइडिया हो, जो भी है, इनने जब अपना लाइसेंस जब लिया था तो ये यूनिवर्सल सर्विस ऑब्लिगेशन फंड के में इनके जो हमसे चार्जेस लेते हैं एक छोटा सा हिस्सा जाएगा। ये एक फंड बना हुआ है, उसमें करोड़ों रुपए, 60 करोड़ जैसे विनोद ने कहा, अभी तक जमा हैं, और उस पैसों का थोड़ा सा अगर इस्तेमाल हो सके मात्र कम्युनिटी रेडियो की जरूरतें देखते हुए, तो ये एक बहुत लंबी मांग है। वन वर्ल्ड ने एक समय आज से 10 साल पहले एक प्रोजेक्ट प्रपोजल भी रखा था, उस प्रपोजल का एक बार यस भी हो गया था एट वन लेवल फॉर अ डिफरेंट सॉर्ट ऑफ थिंग, क्योंकि उन दिनों टेक्नोलॉजीज अलग थी। उन दिनों की टेक्नोलॉजीज देखते हुए कि भाई विनोद, दैट टाइम हमारा ये था कि सबके पास स्मार्ट, बहुत लोगों के पास फीचर फोन्स थे, तो उस गैप को कैसे ब्रिज करें, इस फंड से थोड़ा पैसे लिया जाए, मगर इसमें बहुत बाधाएं आई। विनोद जो कह रहे हैं कि स्टेक होल्डर्स जैसे यूनेस्को चेयर हो या वन वर्ल्ड हो, हम बिल्कुल अवगत हैं इस बात से कि रेडियो स्टेशंस को ऑपरेट करने में, खासतौर इस कोरोना वाले काल में, बहुत सारे मुश्किलों का सामना करना पड़ा। मैं खुद कई रेडियो स्टेशंस का जानता हूं विनोद, जिन्हें बहुत दिक्कत हुई अपने बिजली के बिल्स गर्मियों में जमा करने के लिए, क्योंकि एयर कंडीशनर चलाना ही था, वरना आपका ट्रांसमीटर फूक जाएगा, और बिजली के बिल्स बड़े बड़े आ रहे थे, वो जमा करने के लिए उनको बहुत परेशानियां हुई। एंड सरकार की तरफ से कई सारे और कई व्यवस्थाएं हो सकती थी, तो वो वाले उनकी बात कर रहे हैं विनोद, कह रहे हैं कि अगर वो यूनिवर्सल सर्विस ऑब्लिगेशन फंड जो है, जो सरकार ने ऐसे ही परिस्थितियों के लिए बनाया था, अगर उसका इस्तेमाल हो जाए तो and Vinod, we think we have to advocate for this. Thanks, Vinod. I'm sorry.
Absolutely. I mean, this is an important advocacy issue for organizations.
Vinod, you're muted.
I'm not, I think. Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yes, we can hear you.
So, one last point I'll make before I stop, which is to do with leveraging digital technology during this period and beyond. Many of the stations, some of them who are here today and others who are not here, have always struggled to incorporate the internet and digital technologies into their very important community broadcasting work. Now, the coronavirus pandemic has brought in both challenges as well as opportunities for leveraging digital technologies. In spite of this sort of national, global rhetoric and hype about digital India, uh, I'm grateful for all the last mile connectivities that are now being extended to rural India. But in spite of that, I strongly remain an analog missionary for community radio. I'm not sold to digital dreams yet. Uh, as long as the internet penetration in India is only about 40% or so, right? We cannot afford to give up on the valuable analog spectrum that communities have, right? We need to hold on to it for dear life. Uh, where some of you are operating in the kind of difficult terrain and regions, the FM airwaves are really important. Having said that, the kind of difficulties that some of you have faced, some of your staff have faced in reaching the radio station during the pandemic, the idea of social distancing. I mean, I have a lot of problems with this concept, social distancing. I mean, I would rather use the term physical distancing. I mean, social distancing and community radio are such opposites of each other, right? I mean, community radio is about closeness, not about distance. Yeah, but anyway, uh, with these things, I think many stations have improvised and have used their smartphones to be able to broadcast to their station, to record. Many of them I know tell me they have learned how to edit on their mobile phones now. Amazing. I mean, some of my students doing MA in my university still haven't figured it out. So I'm really impressed with the way in which communities have risen to the occasion to build their capacities, because the work has to go on, right? Now, it has been possible where digital connectivity is there, where some internet availability is there, they have been able to leverage this. So where possible, in spite of being an analog missionary, I am increasingly suggesting that let's make use of digital technologies, social media like WhatsApp and Facebook and YouTube, wherever possible. Yeah, wherever there is connectivity, wherever your communities have access, why not leverage that? I get messages from friends, who can't type in their messages on WhatsApp. They send me beautiful audio recorded messages on WhatsApp in Telugu and Hindi and so on, and we somehow manage to communicate, right? So it's not necessary that the use of some of these platforms requires 100% literacy. I mean, we need to also build on social media, digital media literacies of our communities, so that, I mean, this is also a public resource. And how do we take advantage of this? While keeping in mind, of course, people like Bijoy and me and Abha have to keep in mind while advocating digital technologies that the digital divide is still very real. Yeah, I mean, we have not gone past it. But within what we have, how can we improve the capacities of our communities to leverage digital media? So this is another huge learning that has happened in the last 2 years. Yeah. So let me once again thank One World and UNDP for organizing these kinds of workshops and for inviting me to share some of my thoughts. Forgive me, Bijay, if I've put on some of my advocacy hat in this kind of workshop, but I thought this is
most welcome, most welcome.
Some of the angst we have about how this sector needs to, go to the next level with appropriate public support. Thank you very much.
Before Abha thanks you formally, and we know that you have to go, I think what you said about the ability of community radio stations, some of the practitioners to just do work on their mobiles and send it across, while a lot of us are still analog. In the last few days, a series of webinars we had, we somehow managed to insist and get the second line of leadership in the radio stations. And that was amazing. We didn't get the people who were coming with the, the same people who were coming all the time. There was a second line of leadership, and that is emerging. And such a heartening thing to see. And the corona epidemic has actually brought that forward, because these are the people who could, sitting on their mobiles, edit a program and send it across.
Yes.
So that's a very big achievement without working for it. But every word that you said, I think we have to now find a common platform also to start advocating for that. Abha, I don't want to eat further into Vinod's time and your time. Please thank
Not at all, Vijay.
has to go and
Thank
you very much.
I hope, Vijay, that we can soon
Vinod,
get
you
to
are
meet. I hope we soon get to meet in person. Having community radio dialogues like this online doesn't make me one bit happy. I really miss the chais and the samosas on the side, and the exciting conversations that we always had on the side. I think hopefully in the new year we'll be able to resume these kinds of activities. Thanks again, Abha. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I love the idea of chai samosa. I'm a foodie myself, so that is something I also miss. Having a lone cup of tea and switching off your camera and taking a sip just doesn't excite me. But thank you so much for taking time, and I love the advocacy hat. I do get swayed sometimes because coming from a bureaucratic family, I have seen and all this that वो कहते हैं सरकार में ऐसे ही होता है, which gets to my goat like anything. I also don't believe in that. But yes, if we can undertake certain steps which can put them in a dock, rather than putting us in a dock, always saying that, you have not done this, you have not done this. So that is where I'm coming from, that community radio stations, they need to up their ante and their functioning in such a way that tomorrow none of the departments can turn around and say, these things were missing and therefore we did not do this. That was the only thing. I'm a fighter, and together we can fight for a lot of things. So look forward to all that interactions. And hopefully, whenever you're coming next to Delhi, if you've started traveling, we would love to meet up. And let's have some sort of a workshop or a roundtable in the first trimester of next year, and get the ball rolling and get over with Corona and everything else.
Yes, that sounds like a plan.
Absolutely.
Let's do that. Yeah.
Thank you so much
very much.
for all the